Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hello, Steph.
Hello, Sarah.
So at the moment, it's nearly 3 o'clock in the UK. Obviously, it's still morning time, but I would appreciate it if you could give us a rundown of exactly what you've eaten today so far.
Oh, well, it is only 10 a.m. here almost. So what have I eaten? So I
wasn't being serious.
Oh.
I mean, you can if you want.
Well, what were you asking for then?
Because we're talking about food logging and logging your food.
Well, I'm going to tell you because you asked.
All right, let's hear it. What have you had?
This is an interesting question you asked today because I had something different than I usually do today because we ran out of eggs. I usually have eggs. I like eggs in the morning, but we didn't have it. And I was heading to drive my kids to camp. And then I knew I had to come right here and come right into the closet. So I needed to eat just then. So I had, there was yogurt still left it was the end of it. So I love when that happens because then I take the whole container of the yogurt and then I dump in all my toppings and I just mix it up and I eat it out of the container. I don't know why. I just think that's so much fun. So I had the yogurt and I had blueberries. I just poured some in and nuts. So I have these salted pecans and walnuts and I poured that in and mixed it all up and I ate that and then I felt terrible. So I was driving home from camp feeling like nauseous and which never happened. I have a stomach of steel. But I don't know what's going on. I feel okay now, but it was just that whole ride home. I was like, oh, that's not sitting well.
No. Oh.
And that's all. And then I've got my water.
Water.
My water. Did I tell you that story?
No.
All right. It's for another day.
Okay.
What's the topic today, Sarah?
The topic today is, well, we've kind of combined two because it's something we get quite a few questions about, but I think they kind of nicely complement each other. And it's about food planning and food logging.
Okay.
So I think often there's this idea in recovery and intuitive eating that you're going with the flow and you're just responding to whatever it is that you want. And then at the same time, you're having people tell you, oh, it's really important to eat regularly. It's really important to have meals. And actually, I don't know what it's like in the US, but most treatment programs here, certainly national health treatment programs in the UK, involve food diaries. That is an integral part of the treatment, is that you have to log everything that you eat. So this is the accepted treatment for something like binge eating, bulimia as well, like all kinds of other levels of disordered eating that you probably wouldn't get treatment for here. But this is what the thinking is. What are your thoughts on that? On food diaries in general, where does your mind go with them?
Diaries, I like a whole lot less than structure and planning and regularity. I think that they are just such a slippery slope. I think that creates a lot of disorder. And in fact, I can think off the top of my head of like multiple times in my life where logging food led directly into an episode of disorder. In fact, it was my catalyst for becoming restrictive in the first place in high school. I had to log my food for a science class for biology. And I became obsessed with what I was putting down because I started to just pay so much attention to it.
Oh, the first time I had to do food logs was my binge eating had been going on around about 9 months, maybe even a bit less. It was the first time I sought treatment and I went to a private CBT therapist and she had me, it was paper then, now you can get them electronically, this paper food diary that I had to log everything I'd eaten, put up my hunger scale in, so how hungry you are from 1 to 5, any compensatory behaviors like purging, laxatives, that kind of thing. You're supposed to note where you are, emotions, and then there's a section for notes. So the argument for them is this idea of increasing self-awareness. Now, on the whole, with my clients, I don't use them very often, but seems to be a sort of a subset of people who really benefit from them.
Yeah.
And I really have seen the benefits of people doing them for a few weeks, never permanently, because there are occasions when people really don't know what's going on. Yeah. So like anything, I'm loath to say that they are bad in and of themselves. I don't like them. For myself, every time I've done them, it's not been helpful. But I can see how it can help with awareness. But I think also working with someone when you're doing that, to have that kind of support. So you're really talking about what's going on in the
Yeah.
food diary, as opposed to just trying to do it for yourself, to try and use the food
Yes.
diary as accountability.
Yes. So I think talking in subsets is important because there always is that one, right? In any topic we're talking about, there's no absolute bad or good in terms of a technique or approach. I think it's more those that might lean towards like complete dissociation with food. Also, I've noticed with my clients who have uh, ADHD, it's just that pause and that injection of a pause enough to reflect and notice and create awareness. But the way I do it with clients is with the WhatsApp, we talk it through or they'll write it through on a text so that you're right. There's this feedback that is outside of oneself and it's in a safe space versus the writing down and then your own mind shaming, shoulding, judging what's being written down without that feedback.
Another occasion where again, like I'm want to be really careful how I say this, but on one occasion when I was logging my food from a diet perspective, there were times when it helped me to reduce catastrophic thinking. I think overall it was problematic because of trying to stay within a certain limit. That was the problem. But in terms of the actual logging part, there were a couple of occasions when I thought I'd really, in my mind at that time, messed up, that everything had completely gone to crap. And then when I actually looked at what I'd had, it wasn't as bad as my emotions were telling me. And I don't mean bad like that, but it wasn't as big as
Mm-hmm.
my emotions were telling me at the time. So I can remember that. But that again was about the awareness of what was happening, as opposed to the actual logging of the food, trying to create a deficit, which wasn't great for me overall.
Well, also, I remember that the other way around when I would try to self-impose writing down what I was eating. And there were times where I was just leaning right into a binge and that was going to happen. And so writing it down was just me, like, it was almost like rubbing salt in the wound because it was like this and this and this and this. I mean, the list went on and on and on. So almost the opposite effect where it was a bit like, I don't want to see this all in black and white. This list doesn't really end and it's not stopping now. So it just made me feel more ashamed to see it like that. So, but the other part I think that ends up being true about logging is it becomes so much of a focus. Like it's hard to take your attention to other places when that's constantly, it's like my fitness pal too. It becomes obsessive in a way and it's hard to leave it. It's hard to focus on other things outside of the identity of a binge eater or someone who is recovering from disordered eating. It's like the focus remains so much on the food, which we need it to be to a degree, but I think it heightens that. And then I think we rely on it. I don't know. I don't personally find it helpful. And for many clients, I find it unhelpful. But when we're talking about like food structure, which I know is another part of this conversation, I think that's different. And I actually really do like that, having that anchoring. I think there's something different about the two.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the planning and we probably talked about this in similar terms before, but that idea of reducing the number of decisions you have to make
Mhm.
around food, particularly in a moment. For me, the surest way for me to become really derailed with my food was always if I'd woke up one day and had no idea what I was going to eat that day and had to figure
Yeah.
everything out as I went along. It never went well when I had a day like that. I
Yeah.
always ended up just back in chaos.
So do you do that now? Do you wake up and know what you're going to have?
I have an idea of my meals.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd have an idea of my meals, or I'd think, well, I need to go and get a few if I didn't have anything in.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned before, I get recipe boxes delivered as well. So that really helps knowing that.
So I think this idea that intuitive eaters or quote unquote normal eaters eat in this free flowing way and don't think about it isn't even true mostly because I don't when we were just having that conversation just now, I was thinking I don't plan my meals. But then I was thinking, well, I generally know what I'm having in a day because it's become so routine to me as far as there's certain things I generally have for breakfast. There's certain things I generally have for lunch. These are the things I keep in my house. They're part of my habits. And I think with people who I think for people who eat, so all of us, we do know to some degree based on what's around and what we tend towards. Um, Not that I definitely don't know in the morning like what I'm having each meal like that, but there's a general pool of things I'm choosing from just practically. So there is some level of awareness, but I do implement, which is harder and less natural. meal times. Like there's times where I'll veer away from that and I'll find myself more haphazardly eating, especially where I have client calls through lunch times. And then it's very fuzzy. It gets messy. So I have had to consciously bring myself back to, no, like I need to have lunch around this time, and I need that to be a little bit more intentional. And that is really anchoring for me and very helpful, and part of, I think, not necessarily part of what we assume intuitive eating to be. But for me, that intentionality has allowed for more intuition.
And something that I think is probably a bit different between you and I, because you're cooking for a family. The other night I was at my friend's house and she said, "Oh, what should we have for dinner?" And I was like, "Well, what have you got?" And then she's looking in the freezer and she's looking in the fridge and she's like, "Well, I could do this, or I could do this, I could do this." And there was a few options. And it still kind of blows my mind, right? Because if somebody came round, there's nothing I could just rustle up for dinner that I've got in, unless I happen to have one of my delivery boxes here.
Mm.
So I have to go to the shops. I don't go and do a big shop. I hate having to do a big shopping load. So I live 5-minute walk from Marks and Spencer's food hall and a Tesco Express. So I get my boxes delivered. And then it's like how they did it in the old days, Steph, where they go to just the little shop and they get what they need. That's how I tend to do it. So I'm going to the shop probably every other day, only thinking 1 or 2 days in the head in terms of what I might need in for breakfast or lunch.
Not me. I would like to do that. If I lived alone, I would do that. But I have to think, more in advance. So that's the way I've structured it. And I go to I still end up going to the grocery store multiple times a week, just because everyone eats things quickly. But I generally buy like 3 or 4, like 3 meats, fish, and then veggies, fruits. I just bulk shop. And then I never know. I don't do meal planning like for dinners. So I generally like come out of my office and like, all right, what's for dinner? Open my fridge and choose and just put things together. But I have also like a pretty good selection of things that I like. Oh, I like to make this and I like to make that. They're still habits. It's funny. My daughter's going to my parents next week. Well, they all are. They're going to visit their grandparents. And my oldest daughter said to me, "Oh, I'm so excited to go to Mimi's because she makes the best food." So I told my mom, I know it's fine. I have full confidence in my cooking abilities. So, but I told my mom, because I think that's nice. I was like, "Oh, mom, she's looking forward to it because of your cooking." And my mom was very like immediately texted me back and was like, "Oh, it's not that I cook well. It's just that I have a different variety. So it's a novelty to you." And I was like, "Mom, you can own it. You cook well." She does. But it is true too, that when you have different things, like there's something exciting about that. And, it's the same rote things that I make. And I sometimes think about what my mom makes, and I get excited when I go visit her too. I'm like, "Oh, we're going to have like the sausage, peppers, potatoes dish that I never make, and the things that she makes that I don't." Because we do fall into habits of cooking. So it's not true that like, I thought as an intuitive eater, it would just be this, or not that I thought it, because I didn't actually start out that way. But when I think about the image of intuitive eating, there's something about it that feels like you just pick, like, it's just very wide variety. And in reality, is pretty mundane. It just gets to be because that's how you practically live, which there's nothing wrong with. And I think that that's helpful as far as decreasing decisions and that overwhelm, because you can't possibly keep up with a 1,000,001 recipes, or, it's just a lot. So you do tend to go towards your standbys, which becomes part of I think that is part of like meal planning.
Agreed. And none of my plans are set in stone. I'm always happy to change my mind if I fancy something else, or an event comes up and I'm going to go out, whatever it might be. But what would you say to people who, so this is my dad, to be honest, who he's like, "I can't plan my meals because I never know what I'm actually going to fancy at that time." Yeah. What do you say to that?
So I have clients who'll say that as well. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, it doesn't have to be exactly what you want, because I think that would get in my way so much of that kind of pressure of, unless like you are able to go out somewhat regularly and choose what you want. Okay, but if you're not, right? Like I could never do that. If that kind of pressure was on me, there would just be so much more chaos in my life, because I'd have to be running to the store and like thinking about it. So sometimes it's just about getting the job done. And I sometimes consider like lunches in particular for me are probably the least exciting meal. I find them to be the hardest to come up with and the hardest to want, as far as like most of the time I feel like I'm looking around like, I don't know what I want. This doesn't sound good. This doesn't sound, I don't have a lot of time. I got to pick something. So in that way, it becomes almost like you just have to get that. Just eat something that's good enough and move along. But I think sometimes there's this idea of like, what if I don't know exactly what I want, or if it's not the exact right satisfying thing, that's somehow bad or not intuitive, or I think there's a perfectionism in that.
Oh, definitely. And even being able to tolerate food being boring. Because when food is chaos, it's the highs, it's the lows, it's so much emotion and so much investment in the decision. And when that investment, the emotional investment comes down, I think you say it's a bit like, yeah, okay, just get the job done. Got to feed this body, keep it going.
But I could understand why, like the boring meals or the disappointing meals. It's like, if that's your high, if that's your moment of, this is mine, this is my pleasure, that's harder. But I have a question. What do you eat for lunch typically? Like, what is your...
So I go through phases, and quite often I will eat the same thing for a while. So I can tell you exactly what I've had for lunch the last 3 days, and it was identical every day.
Okay.
The weather here was really hot in the UK, so I knew I wanted cold stuff. So I haven't bought these for years. I think probably haven't bought them for about 3 or 4 years. I bought some oat cakes, and I bought hummus, and I bought guacamole. And so I would spread it. I'd do one with hummus, and then I'd do one with guacamole. And then I chopped up a load of cucumber, which was really refreshing as well. Nice. And I had the cucumber, and then I was having pineapple and strawberries and cherries and all these fruits as well. That was my lunch for 3 days in a row. I really enjoyed those lunches. So I will probably carry on having that for lunch now for several days.
Yeah, I'm like that too.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what other lunches. I mean, I've told you before where lunch has been a cinnamon slice and an apple as well.
Yeah.
It can be
cinnamon
that too.
Slices.
I love a cinnamon slice.
Maybe this could be an episode of ideas for meals, because I think it borders on what I eat in a day, and I don't want to do that. But I think it's so interesting to hear what other people have, because just hearing you say that, like, I don't ever quite put those things together like that, but I would love to. And now I'm like, oh, that's an idea. And I think I would really enjoy that. And I think sometimes that coming from a place of, I don't know what I want because I just haven't had any sort of, like, food is just such a weird thing for me. Coming out of recovery, having ideas is so important.
Yeah. But actually, another thing that I would often do when the weather's cooler is I have my main meal early. So sometimes I have my hot meal at lunchtime, and that's quite a common thing. And then I have something more snacky, a bit like a supper. Do you use the word supper in the US much? Yeah, like a supper later.
That is how I am actually, I think, more programmed to eat. I notice that all the time, that I'm much hungrier in the middle of the day and then less so in the evening. But it's hard because of the family dynamic. Like, I make the biggest meal for dinner, and that's so, it always like kind of bums me out. But c'est la vie.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
So I have a question then, just to loop back around to the thing about being satisfied or not being satisfied by what you eat. How would you think about or talk about the difference between that sense of dissatisfaction because it just wasn't quite what you wanted, and sometimes we need to figure out how we can tolerate that, and that sense of dissatisfaction because it wasn't enough?
What's the difference?
Yeah, how might you just think about that?
Okay, well, for something that wasn't exactly satisfying, I find that I need more palate rounders. So the other day, I didn't have much in my house for lunch, and I ended up having a leftover. We'd had hot dogs on Sunday, so I had a leftover, and that's not my favorite. So I had a hot dog with this like leftover steamed broccoli. It just wasn't. It was not good. It was mushy by that point, and I think I put some pumpkin seeds in it, and potatoes. Anyway, it was very bland. The leftovers that we had were just. And so I ate it like begrudgingly, and I ate enough, but I think that's why I added the pumpkin seeds, because I needed a crunch factor. And then afterwards I had chocolate because I needed the sweet factor. So I find that when something's kind of boring, I need more flavor profiles and textures to round it all out. And then I have a glass of water and be like, I'm done. And then I move along. But I can't just leave it at like the basics. If it's too boring on my palate, I need to amp it up somehow. Not having enough though, distinct. That is, then I am, well, there's more of that hunger feeling left, and I'm not able to be distracted. So there is a similarity almost in the beginning, because when you're not satisfied with something, you're still looking around. I find that like there's still this like, what else can I have? What else can I have? I think that's really confusing. But I think from teaching it so much, I've gotten into this habit of paying attention to the way my stomach actually feels versus, is this coming from up here, up in my head area, or is this coming from my stomach? Which is a lot of times while I'll have the water. So when I have a glass of water after a meal, I can tell whether because having water, if I'm still hungry, makes me more hungry. And having water when I've actually had enough solidifies that. It's something with those signals for me. So I know just through that and by paying attention to where the urge is coming from. And I can tell by how easily I'm distracted. So if I go back into my office and resume working, within, as soon as I sit down, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm over it. I'm done. But if I'm still thinking about food as I'm typing, it's like, nope, then I'm still hungry and I need to go back for that. So I've looked for the different ways that these things show up differently.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, yes, it feels a little bit different. And it's often a little bit more about, if it's not quite, I say not quite enough, because if I can honestly say I've been listening to my hunger and I've been eating enough up to that point, it almost doesn't matter if that one meal isn't enough, because the next meal, I'm just going to feel hungrier and I'm just going to make sure that I eat till satisfaction. I'm going to really try and focus on having something extra satisfying as well. So it's okay for me to have a meal that doesn't feel like enough, as long as it really is about because the food's run out. Do you see what I mean? Sometimes it's not enough because the food's gone, as opposed to I'm going to try and stop myself from eating this much. So yesterday when I was staying at my friend's, she did like a big cooked English breakfast in the morning. Well, that's, it's egg, it's bacon, it's sausage, it's waffles, it was loads of food. And I felt really nicely full afterwards as well. But when lunchtime came, I wasn't hungry. And so I thought I'll do my walk first and then I'll eat afterwards. And by the time I got back, it was 3:00. And I'd eaten breakfast before 9. I thought I'm still not hungry, but I'm about to go and see a couple of clients and I'm going out for dinner later. So I need to have something. So I said to myself, I'll just have a couple of those oat cakes and that'll see me through. But when I started eating them, I thought, no, actually, I want more. And that was what, like, I ate more. I ate what I would have had if I'd been having lunch when I felt hungry, if that makes sense. So sometimes as well, if I think it's something about just being really honest with myself. Am I going like, do I want this? How's this feeling? If the outcome of following those questions through and making choices leads me to afterwards to kind of go, yeah, because that for me is what it feels like afterwards. It feels like, yeah, that was
yeah. I think what you're bringing up is really important about being honest with yourself and that being the difference. But if I don't eat enough, I could not, I think if I went from 9 to 3, my body would be panicking. I think there's a part of my body that remembers restriction. And I know that's more significantly in my history. There's a part of my body that will never let that go. That's just permanently like, you can't go that long.
Can I ask you a question about when I came to see you in New York?
Yeah.
When we were in New York that day when you left your laptop in the hotel safe.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
We'd had lunch at about 1:30, 2:00. And then we didn't get to eat again till 9. It was about 9, 9:30. Was there some panic there for you?
There was too much adrenaline. So it's on our ride home. Yeah. All of a sudden it flooded in. Like, I need to eat. That was, hunger came back in. But where I have adrenaline going on, then my body like goes into a different gear.
Oh, I see.
But typically I'm not typically leaving my laptop in New York City and like, oh no. There was a bigger problem then.
But Well, that was fine for me because I knew that we were eating when we got back. So I was hungry, but there was no agitation, there was no tension around that for me.
Yeah.
Um,
But I probably snacked. Because remember we talked about this where I probably had a snack. I don't remember, but
you didn't. You
I
didn't.
probably did. I probably had like a handful of nuts or something.
Oh, okay, maybe.
Maybe not. I don't
Maybe when we
remember
got back to yours, because we got back to yours, then we had to drive back into New York
Yeah.
City.
There's a chance that I grabbed something knowing I would. That's what I think I would have done.
Mm-hmm.
But if if we were just moving too fast, I wouldn't have maybe. But
Yeah.
generally, my body really doesn't like it. It gets really nervous about it.
Yeah. So we're recording this at the moment in the UK heat wave, just kind of at the tail end of it. And we'd had some hot weather beforehand. And often in hot weather, my appetite does reduce, but it hadn't really. But then when the heat really hit, my appetite did go down. And on the Tuesday afternoon, I was down on the South Coast and I had a couple of hours. I just wanted to get down to the beach and go and jump in the sea. And so I was like, I really don't want to stop for lunch. I don't have a lot of time. So I grabbed some fruit and then I just went down to the beach because I was thinking, I'm not hungry, I'll be fine. When I got to the beach, I was telling you this earlier, Steph, the storm clouds came in and I was really cold. And the minute I was cold, I was hungry. I felt it come right up in me. And I was like, now I'm really hungry. I genuinely don't think I would have felt that hunger had I still been as hot as I had been earlier.
But you talk about cold as a vulnerability. Like that makes you sad, right? When you get cold.
Yeah.
So there's something interesting about, to me, that's really interesting as far as the body feeling. Like there's something that goes on in your nervous system when you get cold versus hot.
It was real hunger stomach as well. It comes up and you can feel like your stomach is hungry and it would like food. And I'd left my phone with my payment methods in the car half a mile away because I wanted to go in the sea and I was on my own. I didn't want to leave my phone on the beach. So I didn't even have a way to buy anything. So I was like,
what'd you do?
I sat and shivered and waited for the storm to pass. Got rained on a little bit, was convinced it was going to get hotter again. Sat there for 2 hours, it didn't. And then on the way back, I knew I was having dinner, but I was hungry and it was about 5 o'clock and I thought it was going to be another hour and a half till dinner. So I went into the Sainsbury's and I grabbed a protein bar. Actually. And then I had a couple of sweet potato falafels when I got back. And then I had dinner as well.
What would you say about having meal? What is the title of this episode? Food logging and what?
So just talking about food logging and food planning, titled
planning.
TBC.
Okay, food planning. It's along that vein. So food planning, like sticking to that as a regulated experience. By that, I mean, what if you're finding hunger outside of the planning?
Oh, fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll eat something. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, totally.
What if you're just feeling emotionally hungry? But like, do you hold those boundaries close? Do you find it helpful?
The boundaries being?
So let me put it this way. So I have a client who we've been working for quite some time, and there's a lot of distrust in her body, like between her and her body. And so she wanted to approach this in the way you recovered, almost like when I'm hungry kind of thing. What she ended up finding was that was really misleading her. She has a really strong restrictive history. And we talked about this and I said, this is a risk. And she said, well, let's just try it this way. And we did. And it ended up where she's trying to use that almost to, she said, this isn't working. So I said, okay, let's go to meal planning, like as far as meal windows, having these anchors of time that we eat in the day. But she also leans towards binging, right? So it's one extreme or another. So she's like, well, if I'm hungry between meals, I'm just gonna. So it was this whole thing. So I was like, let's try to have boundaries around the four meal times a day. And these are the times that we eat, and we need to establish consistency and reliability and rhythm with food that your psychology is not going to try to manipulate and get around. So these are the times that we're eating. If there is physical hunger between those times, you have a snack. But if there is itchiness, like eating itchiness between those times, let's try to have a boundary there, because that itchiness is part of the disorder. Mm-hmm. But for some people, that could be really a tricky concept, because it's like, well, is that restriction? Because I'm still wanting something between these meal times, and not having it might incite my restrictive response. So how do you see that?
Well, for me, that itchiness was always more about an experience than just the food. When I had that itchy feeling, I want the food, but I also need to be watching television or be doing something out, driving, doing something else at the same time. I started to recognize that itchiness as this desire to kind of to soothe, to numb, etc. Where I went to with, okay, I'm feeling itchy, I want this food, I'll have it, but can I just be with the food? Can I just really enjoy and taste the food? And if there is some hunger there, the answer to that would be yes. And if there was no hunger and this itchy feeling, because it was about something else, I would feel like that resistance. I'd feel that like, no, I don't want to pay attention. I don't want to be, focusing on it. Because I must admit, when I drove back from the beach and I went into Sainsbury's, I remember going into Sainsbury's and I feel like I want to buy everything. And I had that, it was just like that slight feeling of wanting to just get a whole load of things. And I was like, okay, what is it you actually want? I want the taste of something sweet, but I want something that's going to feel more filling. Having a protein bar can sound a bit like, oh, I had to go for it because I didn't think of it as being healthier than chocolate. It was a chocolate protein bar. So I had that chocolate taste, but I knew I was going to get that more of a fullness feeling. And I really wanted to feel something more solid in my stomach.
Yeah. But you're speaking from a recovered standpoint.
Of course.
I think this changes over time depending on where you're at. And I think person to person. So there's some clients I've had that I would never do that. It's like there's something in that psychology and physiology that wouldn't respond well to that, but others that would. And I think that's where all these nuances are, is everyone's got a different history, story, different contexts. But I like to bring it up because I think sometimes I sometimes talk a lot about that permission and freedom, and I don't talk as much about the boundaries, and they are so important in some contexts as part of that moving through. I don't need those boundaries like that anymore because I have such a trust in myself. But in the beginning, none, and I would always push the envelope, and boundaries were important for me to learn. I didn't have a sense of my own boundaries ever, and so that was part of my recovery, like in general, self stuff. So I don't think it's always the case in light of the topic of this episode, where we're talking about things that might feel less permissive or having more structure that can be kind of associated with more diety stuff. It's not always the case that it is diety.
Yeah. I'm also quite a fan of the idea of waiting. And that can sometimes be co-opted by the diet industry. It's like, oh, wait 10 minutes and see if you still want it. But actually creating that pause, especially if you've just been eating after dinner, maybe being hit with that really intense desire that feels like, I don't know if this is bingey, I don't know if this is just about wanting dessert, to be able to hold that time, knowing that you can still make the choice to eat it. When it really is about, I just fancy a dessert, waiting 10 minutes to have a dessert will feel probably okay. When it's this more intense, more compulsive feeling, that 10 minutes could feel like forever. And there's part of you that's going, no, I don't want to wait. I want the eating experience to continue. You're right. Like when we're talking about permission, we don't talk enough about what it means to stop.
Yeah.
Because that has to be done. Yeah, probably. But it has to be done so gently. And I try and do it because we have to, the whole point of the permission part, the way I see it, is to feel a bit calmer about your food choices, to recognize there isn't a right or wrong decision. And if there isn't a right or wrong decision, any option's viable, then you can start really making choices.
Yeah. I think the reason I lean the other way sometimes when I talk about this is because I'm always thinking of that restrictive history first, where the waiting isn't even possible, where there is that primal hunger. That stuff has to get cleared out, and then we get to this place. So it's, again, the stages of this.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's not a one size fits all.
No. There's such a spectrum with disordered eating. What could be really useful for one can be massively triggering and harmful for someone else, even with something like planning. Because I think for me, when I was right in it, planning, if I was planning my food, it was always less than what I would have needed.
Well, talking about logging, going back to that, did you ever do anything like MyFitnessPal?
Oh, yeah.
You did?
Yeah. Oh,
did you find yourself obsessed with it?
I don't know if obsessed is quite the right term. It didn't take me. So I was struggling with bulimia at the time when I did my Fitness Pal, and eating quite low caloric amount to the point where it's saying, we won't close your day because you should eat more than this. But then I would have binges and then I would purge, but that wouldn't count.
Right.
So I went through the cycle of that for a few months. So yes, definitely done that. I've done writing down foods as well. The whole reason why I suggested this episode for the podcast was I had a message from someone on social media, and they said, can you do a post or can you talk about how to stop logging everything that you eat and how to stop counting calories? And my kind of response to that was I hadn't done anything about how to stop logging because it presumes that the logging is the problem. And actually it's more what logging can trigger for a lot of people that's problematic. But I've had messages from people before who will say, I log and I've been logging for years and this is how I've managed my binge eating for years. And it might not be ideal, but it makes me feel safer than trying to go through any other path of recovery.
Safe is an interesting word, though, because again, just like our previous conversation where one person's poison is another person's, what's the other word? It's the opposite of poison. Well, anyway, safety can be like food logging can make
medicine.
That's it. Thank you. Thought we weren't going to get there. Safety can be misinterpreted as obsession. And I could understand how someone might find it safe as far as keeping balance. And someone else might find how that feels safe is that it keeps me controlled. It keeps me, but controlled not in a balanced way, like controlled as in, if you let me out of here, I would just.
The whole point of obsession, we obsess over something, often because we're trying to figure something out. We're trying to make it better. And we might be trying to seek safety. And I think it might be possible for some people to do it in a way that there might be some obsession, but not life-sucking obsession. And actually that kind of hypervigilance is preferable, feels better to them than trying to work through the chaos. I've genuinely had people say to me, like, I use it as a boundary.
But what I think where it's a troublemaker is where we would require a period of higher calorie. Like the same amount of calories that I eat now around, I was trying to eat before actually, but I needed more weight to recover. So I just chronically felt like I was like swimming upstream. Whereas now my body would feel safe with it. My body didn't feel safe with that amount of calories before, even though it wasn't a little bit.
And there's also people not coming from the restricted place.
I know. And I think that's the distinction. It's like
I'm by no way advocating this as a place of recovery.
Yeah.
But I think for some people it can be safer than the chaos of binge restrict. That they can, that they need that line.
It's very personal. I think this is definitely an issue of some people's medicine and some people's poison, because it could be extremely detrimental.
Yeah.
Too.
Do you think it's possible that everybody has the capacity to get into a place of being, more intuitive with food? Do you think everybody has the innate capacity from a biological and psychological perspective to be that self-regulating?
Capacity? Yes. But where I see that so much harder is where there is a history of complex trauma. That is just much harder to wade through.
Yeah.
Because safety is a big part of this. And so where the brain is not wired to understand safety, or if that's so hard to get to, that's going to come first. Yeah. So capacity, sure, but there's a lot more resources that go into it.
And that's a lovely segue into next week's episode, which is going to be about trauma. So to tune in then to hear a continuation of this discussion, but moving and having a little look through a trauma lens and what we mean by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, we have a community if you want to join
it. Yeah, we'll put a link below. We won't go on and on about it, but it's really good.
It's really good.
Even if we do say so ourselves. Really good community.
All right.
All right then, Steph.
All right, everybody.